Hi everyone, welcome to our short 15-minute video on Unit 520, Managing Finance. I'm going to hand you over to our tutor James, who's going to run through the assignment. Thanks, James.
Thank you, Charlotte. And hello, everybody. So today we're going to work through the whole managing finance assignment here for you. And we're two learning outcomes on this assignment with 5 and 6 questions each. So fairly thorough. And the idea here is that this is pitched towards kind of first line managers that have got budgetary responsibility of some kind. And this kind of tests for our ability to understand the way that finance flows through the organization and some of the kind of key definitions in there as well. So without further ado, let's get into this. Now, I would recommend on this assignment in particular, because of the number of questions here, that we kind of apply our 3 golden rules throughout as we go through. And that's going to be to make any definitions of key terms, to make sure that we meet the command verb of the question, that's the first word or two in the question, and to use less is more as we go through. So just as many different comparisons or factors or examples as you need to do to answer the question, and then no more. It's quite important, I think, for this. It's quite a structured assignment, so I think a structured response will take us to the right place in this one. So first learning outcome then is understand finance within organizations. And the first question, 1.1, is to analyze the relationship between financial function and other functional areas within organizations. So let's apply our rules straight away. First of all, definitions. So for me, as this is something based on finance overall, I would have a definition of what we mean by financial function. What does that typically look like? Where does it live in the organization? What kind of people tend to comprise a financial function? And is that, as a function, is that then centralized? Is it distributed across? Just nothing to, get to write the book on it, but a brief description of what financial function can look like in an organizational context would be beneficial here, I think. We're then going to meet the command verb onto our list here, and it's to analyze. That's to break the subject into separate parts and examine each part in detail, identifying the main issues and showing how the main ideas are related to practice and why they are important. Any reference to current research or theory will be beneficial. So here we're going to analyze that relationship then that exists between financial function in the way you defined it and other functional areas in organizations. So I think here it would be worthwhile maybe laying out what those different functions typically would be. So you could talk about HR, you could talk about operations or sales or IT or whatever, seems relevant for you. And then I'd probably be tempted to do a paragraph for each of those different functional areas. And then within each of them, analyze the relationship between the financial function and that area, maybe with a summary paragraph at the end. You don't need to write down all the function areas of the organization, but typically when we do less is more, we might say between maybe 3 and 4. Something like that is, or 3 or 4 is a good number to go for in terms of different functional areas you might consider. Okay, 1.2, examine is the command verb here. The impact of financial objectives on decision making within organizations. With these kind of impact questions, it's really important that you form a very specific linkage in your answer, in this case, between financial objectives and decision making. So you've got to make sure that's very explicit in the answer. There's going to be an impact on decision making of financial objectives. Don't forget when you do impacts as well, that those impacts can be negative, and often are, as well as positive. So don't assume that all impacts are good. We want to try and dig a little bit here around where they might be a bit negative, and that helps the examination of that impact then. Okay, so here again, you might just want to make a list of what some of the typical financial objectives might be. So examples given in indicative content would include cost minimization, that's really usual. Profit maximization, that's really usual. Economic sustainability in here as well. Now, one thing that strikes me straight away, and you might consider as you're writing this, is sometimes these different objectives work against each other. So if we're going for profit maximization, for example, well, how does that fare with economic sustainability? Like if we're trying to really make it look good in the next 6 to 12 months, sometimes that might mean that there's a concurrent kind of drop off or negative impact that might be in the future. So again, we're looking at the impact of these financial objectives on how we make decisions across organizations, good and bad, and just try and think about some of the kind of more nuanced areas as you go through that question, the examination. Examine here is to inspect the thing thoroughly in order to determine its nature or condition. So again, it's that thorough link between financial objectives and the way decisions are made across the place. 1.3 then, differentiate, that's our command verb this time, between management accounting and financial accounting. Definitions, first of all, I think just a definition of management accounting, open with that, and then a definition of financial accounting sits underneath that. Once you've got both definitions, you're in a position to differentiate between the two. So differentiate is what it says, just to look at what the similarities, what the key differences are between the two things. Where do you think the biggest differences are between the two things overall? I think just there's some crossover and linkage between the two, obviously, but it's just to demonstrate your deep understanding of of what they are individually, how they relate to each other a little bit, but how they're different from each other, not the same thing as well. So it's a real clear definition of both here. 1.4, analyze the impact, again, of organizational and regulatory frameworks on an organization's approach to financial management. You've got two different things happening here. One is your protocols and policies, the things your organization chooses to do. That might be your organizational frameworks. And then you've got regulatory frameworks, which could include Companies Act, very often might do, could be Consumer Credit Act, it could be GDPR, etc., etc. And there are some various different examples of legislature put in the indicative content there. For me, I think I'd be tempted to break this down into 2 paragraphs or maybe 4 paragraphs with 2 for each. For 1 or 2 for organizational frameworks and 1 or 2 for regulatory frameworks. And you're really looking to bind in how that particular framework or approach has an impact, again, positive and potentially negative as well, on the organization's approach to financial management. It is an opportunity here, I think, to make sure that you've got a little bit of reference to external source here, particularly relevant legislation around financial management. So this is your opportunity to put that in here for 1.4. 1.5, analyze the challenges organizations face accessing finance. Good question. So here you're going to identify what you think the main challenges could be and then select, I would say, again, between 2 and 4 specific challenges that you think or have seen in your own context present a challenge for access to finance for organizations. Now, for each of those challenges then, each paragraph, you're going to analyze them each. So it's the detail, look at it in detail underneath it, what really drives it, what the root cause of the challenge might be, that kind of thing. Now, here it mentions things you could consider would include organizational size, what it wants to do in the future, its attitude to risk and innovation. So there is that whole thing of how much does organization want to take on the liability versus what it's set up to do. You might look at past performance, history, how well run it is ultimately, how good is its forecasting, etc. would be a great point here as well. How volatile is its world that it operates within externally and internally as well, and what are some of the challenges you might think, again, around just the access to finance environment, interest rates prevailing, etc. A real good calculation around the cost of finance versus the benefit of investment using the finance, and who takes liability for it ultimately as well. They're all good things to think about. There might be challenges there. A little bit of detail around the challenges, not to list them, but to analyze them. What are they? Where do they come from? How significant are they? A bit more depth than just a list of different challenges here, please. Outcome 2 then, knowing how to set and manage budgets. 2.1, again, that word differentiate. We're going to just good definitions of the two and then compare, contrast them together. So 1 paragraph on budget setting, another paragraph on financial forecasting, and then you're going to really dig between the two about what the real similarities but key differences between budget setting and financial forecasting. There's a relationship between the two, but they're not the same thing. Why are they not the same thing? What are the key differences? This is 2.1. 2.2 then, evaluate. I'll mention that in a sec. Budget setting approaches used by organizations. Okay, let's apply our rules. There's nothing really here to define. You might do a little bit around budget setting, but you've already covered that in detail in 2.1, so probably already covered. The command verb here is evaluate. This is a trip up command verb for level 5. Let's look at what this means. Evaluate is to consider the strengths and weaknesses, arguments for and against, and or similarities and differences. Now, so you can compare and look at pros and cons and strengths and weaknesses here as part of your evaluation, but what's really important here is you must come up at the end of an evaluate with your reasoned judgment overall. What do you think then? What's your valid conclusion over the thing? You have to have an end point with an evaluate, whether that's a few sentences or a wrap up or something. At the end of your response has to perform that evaluation. What do you think then overall on balance is the result? Ideally, you're going to use a bit of current research or theories or information to support that evaluation. So it's not just an opinion piece only, but make sure you've got to have the right structural approach to an evaluate question to pass it. So you've got here, less is more applied. You've got the task here is to select between 2 and 4, again, different budget setting approaches that you're used to seeing in your own organization or that an organization generally may use. So it could be, again, examples here, zero-based, incremental, fixed, flexible, probably typical examples here. So you're going to select what you think are the most interesting contrasts in there, paragraph each, and evaluate each of those budget settings. What do you think about them? What are the pros and cons overall? What's best? What context might they work better or worse within? And then what you might do to evaluate is have an overall wrap-up at the end of the whole thing as well. 2.3, formulate and justify a budget for an area of management responsibility. What you're being asked to do here is to put in place an actual budget that looks towards an area of management responsibility, ideally one that you have that would make more sense to apply into your real world. Using kind of, I guess, what you've done in 2.2 would make sense. So giving you evaluation of different approaches, you might want to select one of those approaches then for 2.3, bearing in mind that the area of management responsibility it is, the context and what your overall evaluation of 2.2 was. So you're kind of following it through and then using a selection of the ones you've already evaluated in 2.2. You're going to make a budget, create one up, that's a formulate, and you're going to justify it. So why do you think that budget is right? Why have you used the approach that you have done? And overall then, what do you think the business case is for that budget for that area of responsibility then? Formulate then, just to remember, is to devise or develop an idea or concept in a concise and systematic way. I think it's fairly self-explanatory. And to justify, it's going to be a rationale for the actions or decisions, ideally underpinned by some data, experience, research, that kind of thing. So you're going to make that nice and applied in 2.3. 2.4 then is to analyze the factors that impact on budget management. Definitions here, first of all, I would possibly have a bit of a definition of what budget management is, what it looks like, tools commonly used. I'd probably start the answer with that. And then again, less is more. You want to select a number of factors that you think impact on budget management perhaps the most, or the most relevant factors for budget management impact. So it could be under and over performance, conflicts, funding reductions, market conditions, increased costs, or you could have all sorts of stuff in there. You could have also unexpected external events like what we call a black swan event, like, real significant paradigm shift to the environment or significant new technologies coming through, that kind of thing. AI is a current case in point, of course. You're going to select between 2 and 4 specifically different but main factors that you think impact on budget management in the way that you've defined budget management, and analyze each of them. So make sure you've got some detail underneath that, not just a list of factors, but dig under how do those factors impact on budget management? When do they? Why do they? Just try and think a little bit outside just a list into a bit more detail for an analyze. 2.5 then, specify corrective actions to be taken in response to budgetary variance. What you might do here is, again, define what budgetary variance might look like. What typically might that look like? How do we know where we're varying? What kind of even basic measure, ways would we know where we've got budgetary variance as we deploy a budget out into the real world? I think here what I'd do is I'd take at least one example of budgetary variance, a specific one, and then specify the kind of corrective actions that would be taken in response to that. So to specify, this is a command verb here, or to identify or state the fact or requirement clearly and precisely, but in detail. So I think to specify the action, I would also include a little bit of not just what you'd intend to do, but why is that? Or what's your rationale behind the decision, just to make sure that you've got that detail underneath it. It's not just I do this, that'd be a really short answer to the question, but what would you do for a particular variance? Now, because it says corrective actions as a plural, it's looking at you to do more than one thing. So there'd be a cluster of different things, at least 2 different actions that you might take in response to that budgetary variance that you have in mind. If you can bring some lived experience here to bear, I think it'd be really relevant and really helpful, so it's not just completely conceptual. Finally, 2.6, discuss reporting procedures for authorizing corrective actions to a budget. You've already defined, I think, most of the key terms in the rest of the assignment here. I can't see you'd really need to do anything different here for definitions. The command verb here is discuss. It's the first time we've seen a discuss. And again, it's a different one. They've got lots of different command verbs on this assignment for some reason. Discuss means to give a detailed account, including, this is really important, a range of views or opinions which have to include contrasting perspectives, almost like having an argument with yourself on the thing. So you're going to look at the thing from different angles, different stakeholders, different contexts, different suppositions to really kind of stress test it a little bit. So you're looking at a discussion on more than 1, but not 20 different reporting procedures. So again, choose between 2 and 4 specifically different reporting procedures. They could be, I don't know, tolerances, contingency, devolved budgeting, all the kind of things I mentioned, indicative content, or other things that you think that might be relevant for you. What do you think overall might be the pros and cons of different reporting procedures to authorize those corrective actions to a budget then? Again, I'd just really recommend you bring some lived experience into it. It always helps the discussion to use examples and your own experience finance. What's the best thing to do? What might be some of the different pros and cons of each way that we do reporting in particular? Where might those sometimes fall down? Why might they work differently for different stakeholders? Are all good things to include there in your discussion. And that's the entire assignment. Make sure you meet those command verbs on this one because there's a lot of variance on them overall.
Thank you very much, James. We hope that you found this helpful. If you do have any questions, you can contact us anytime on cmi@impd.co.uk, and we look forward to receiving your assignment soon. Thanks very much.